January 1942. Colditz Castle, Germany. The Germans had named it Sonderlager Special Camp. They had chosen it because it was, by any reasonable assessment, impossible to escape from. The castle sat on a sheer rock outcrop above the town of Colditz in Saxony, surrounded on three sides by cliff and on the fourth by a courtyard watched by armed sentries at all hours. It had been a prisoner-of-war camp for 2 years, and in those 2 years no prisoner had successfully gotten out. The Germans had put their most persistent escapers here, men from every Allied nation who had been caught trying to escape from other, supposedly secure, camps and sent here as punishment. The logic was elegant. One escape-proof castle, all the troublemakers in one place. What the Germans had not fully considered was what happens when you gather the best escape artists in Europe into one building with nothing to do but think. Airey Neave was 25 years old. He had already been recaptured once, and survived the experience. He had studied the castle for weeks. He had identified the weakness. He was going to walk out the front gate dressed as a German officer. Airey Middleton Sheffield Neave was born on the 23rd of January, 1916, in London. He was the son of Sheffield Neave, a distinguished entomologist. He was educated at Eton and then Merton College, Oxford, where he read law and was active in the debate society that would later make him one of the most formidable parliamentary performers of his generation. He was called to the bar in the months just before the war began, and when war was declared in 1939, he was commissioned into the Royal Artillery. In the spring of 1940, he was posted to France with the British Expeditionary Force. What happened at Calais in late May 1940 was, by any standard, an act of collective courage that bought time for one of the most critical operations of the entire war. The German breakthrough in the Ardennes in May 1940 had cut off the British Expeditionary Force from its supply lines and its retreat. The bulk of the BEF was falling back toward Dunkirk. But at Calais, a small garrison was ordered to hold the port as long as possible, to pin down German armor and infantry that would otherwise be directed toward the Dunkirk perimeter. The Calais garrison consisted largely of the 64th Medium Regiment, Royal Artillery, and the Rifle Brigade, roughly 4,000 men ordered to hold a fortified town against the full weight of the German 10th Panzer Division. Neave was among them. The fighting lasted 4 days, from the 22nd to the 26th of May. The Germans gradually compressed the perimeter, street by street, house by house, until the garrison was fighting from the inner harbor. On the 26th, the order came from London. No evacuation. The garrison was to continue fighting to the last round, to buy every possible hour for Dunkirk. Neave was wounded in the fighting. He was captured on the 26th of May, lying in a street with a wound in his side, unable to move. He was taken to a field dressing station, treated, and eventually moved through the German prisoner-of-war system to a camp at Spangenberg Castle in Hesse. He attempted to escape almost immediately. In the summer of 1940, he made his first serious attempt, crawling under a wire fence during a thunderstorm. He got out of the camp and traveled for several days, trying to reach Switzerland. He was recaptured at the German-Swiss border, wearing civilian clothes he had somehow obtained, his German too elementary to stand close examination. He was sent back through the system, assessed as a persistent escaper, and dispatched to Offlog 4C. Colditz Castle. The castle had been housing troublesome prisoners since November 1940. By the time Neave arrived in the spring of 1941, it held approximately 300 Allied officers. British, French, Polish, Dutch, Belgian. There were roughly 600 German guards, 2 for every prisoner. The approach to escape at Colditz had become, by necessity, highly organized. Different national contingents coordinated through an escape committee structure. Tunnel attempts were monitored by Germans, who became expert at detecting them. The castle sat on solid rock, and the acoustics betrayed digging. Disguise attempts, forged document schemes, bribery attempts, and audacious daytime impersonations were all catalogued, attempted, detected, and adapted. The problem was not ingenuity. Colditz housed more ingenuity per square meter than any building in Europe at that moment. The problem was that every scheme, sooner or later, ran into the fundamental difficulty. To get out of the inner courtyard, you had to pass through a checkpoint staffed by German guards who knew what every face in the castle looked like. Neave's breakthrough was to recognize that the checkpoint was staffed by guards, not by officers. Guards followed rules. Rules did not require a guard to think critically about someone who appeared to have already cleared the previous checkpoint. If he could get into the outer courtyard looking like a German officer, the guards at the outer gate might wave him through without scrutiny. The challenge was getting from the inner courtyard into the theater, a room that could be accessed from the inner courtyard, and from the theater through a carefully identified route into the outer courtyard. The uniforms were the critical element. The disguises at Colditz were made with extraordinary ingenuity from whatever materials the prisoners could obtain. Dutch officers contributed pieces of army blanket in a color that approximated German field gray. Others contributed colored chalk to adjust the tones. Cardboard and boot polish became rank insignia. A prisoner with a background in theatrical costume design helped shape the coats. Neave and his escape partner, a Dutch officer named Tony Ludian, were both on the shorter side, which was actually useful, since they were impersonating German lieutenant ranks, the most junior officer grade and therefore the least likely to attract scrutiny or conversation from real German officers. The identity documents were forged by a team that had spent months studying and reproducing German official papers. The forged Ausweis identity passes were not perfect, but they were good enough for a quick glance under artificial light. On the night of the 5th of January, 1942, they were ready. They entered the theater, which was used for prisoner concerts and theatrical performances. During a rehearsal, which provided legitimate reason for unusual movement, they slipped through a hatch and made their way, in complete silence, along a passage that led to a storeroom on the outer courtyard side of the building. They waited there, in the dark, for the right moment. Then they walked out. Neave, in his German officer's uniform, walked across the outer courtyard with Ludian beside him. A German sentry at the far side of the courtyard looked at them. He saw 2 German lieutenants. He came to attention. They passed through the outer gate. They were outside the castle. What followed was 13 days of controlled, grinding tension. They traveled initially by train, using genuine timetables they had obtained somehow and third-class tickets that Neave's German was good enough to purchase without incident. They traveled through Germany as 2 German soldiers returning from leave, speaking little, carrying themselves with the quiet purposefulness of men who belonged where they were. The greater danger was at border crossings. Near the Swiss border, they left the train and made the final stretch on foot, crossing through forest in the dark, guided by the intelligence reports they had memorized about the patrol schedules and the lay of the land. They crossed the Swiss border at a point near Singen, in the early hours of the morning, and walked into the town of Ramson, Switzerland. They were out. From Switzerland, the British consular network helped them onward. South through Vichy, France, across the Pyrenees on foot, into Spain, and eventually to Gibraltar, where they were able to board a ship for Britain. They arrived in England in the middle of February 1942. Neave was the first British officer to make a successful home run from Colditz, the first to escape the castle and reach Allied territory. He was debriefed exhaustively. Every detail of the castle's layout, its guard routines, the weakness in the checkpoint system, the manufacturing methods for the uniforms, all of it was documented and fed into the growing body of knowledge maintained by MI9, the British intelligence department responsible for supporting escape and evasion. Neave joined MI9 himself. He spent the rest of the war training other escaped prisoners, advising on escape networks, and helping to refine the techniques that would enable hundreds of other Allied soldiers and airmen to make it home from behind German lines. After the war, Neave returned to the law, took his degree, and was called to the Inner Temple Bar. He became a barrister. In 1951, he was elected to Parliament as the Conservative member for Abingdon. He wrote 2 books about his experiences. They have their exits about his escape and Saturday at MI9 about his intelligence work, and both were well received. He served in various parliamentary roles over the next 2 decades. He was not a flashy politician. He was patient, methodical, quietly tenacious, which anyone who knew his history could have predicted. In 1975, Margaret Thatcher ran for the leadership of the Conservative Party. Airey Neave ran her campaign. He organized the vote with the same precision and quiet nerve that he had applied to his escape from Colditz. Thatcher won. Neave became her closest political ally and her head of the Shadow Home Office. On the 30th of March, 1979, Airey Neave got into his car in the underground car park of the House of Commons and started the engine. A bomb, planted by the Irish National Liberation Army, detonated beneath his seat. He died an hour later. He was 63 years old. Parliament paid tribute to him immediately, in the terms that it reserves for the grief that has no precedent and no vocabulary adequate to it. Margaret Thatcher became Prime Minister 5 weeks later. She said, in the weeks after his death, that she had lost the best friend she had. He was buried in the churchyard at Birchington-on-Sea, in Kent. The headstone is simple. It does not say much about Calais. It does not say much about Colditz. It does not say that he was the first British officer to make a home run from the castle the Germans called escape-proof. What he was, in the end, was someone who learned, early under extreme pressure in a cold castle in Saxony, that the most important moment in any escape is the moment you walk through the door and look as though you belong on the other side of it. He spent the rest of his life walking through doors that way. If this story moved you, subscribe to follow the Untold Front. New stories every week.